Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this horror DVD movie review video. This uh, part of my series where I'm taking a look at random horror movies from my DVD collection and reviewing them, ones that I hadn't seen before, some that have a twinge of summer to them for July here. So today we're going to go old school on the bit, real old school, like 1940s old school. We're going to take a look at a horror anthology, and in a lot of ways, the first horror anthology, I think, and that is the classic Dead of Night from 1945 that I have here on DVD. Sorry, the lighting's not too good there, but if you guys want to do a little pause there. Um, but basically, Dead of Night's a movie. This is my second time watching it. I watched it a few years ago for the first time. Um, but I never did a review for it, so I figured it'd be good to add it to this series. So let's just go ahead and get into it. Dead of Night is a 1945 black and white British anthology horror film made by Ealing Studios. The individual segments were directed by I'm going to butcher these names here, but Alberto Cavalcanti, Charles Crichton, Basil Dearden, and Robert Hammer. It stars Mervyn Johns, Georgie Withers, Sally Ann Howes, and Michael Redgrave. The film is best remembered for the concluding story featuring Redgrave and an insane ventriloquist, malevolent dummy. So yeah, so basically the film opens with Walter Craig, our main character, who arrives at a country cottage in Kent where he is greeted by his host, Elliot Foley. Craig is an architect whom Foley has invited to his home to consult on some renovations. Upon entering the sitting room of the cottage, Craig tells Foley and his assembled guests that despite never having met any of them, he has seen them all in a recurring dream. Craig appears to have no prior personal knowledge of them, but is able to predict events in the house before they unfold. Craig partially recalls that something awful will later occur. Dr. Van Straten, a psychologist, tries to persuade Craig that his fears are unfounded. The other guests attempt to test Craig's foresight and entertain each with tales of strange events they experienced or were told about. So that's kind of how our stories are introduced. So that's basically the setup and the premise. Um, so we have five stories here. There's a story with a race car driver Hugh Granger who recalls lying in a hospital after an accident. There's a story of Sally O'Hara, remember attending a Christmas party at a mansion. Joan Cortland tells an incident in which she gave her husband Peter a mirror for his birthday one year. Foley recounts two golfers, George Peratt and Larry Potter, who both fall in love with a woman named Mary Lee. And Dr. Van Straten recollects interviewing ventriloquist Maxwell Freer, who performed with a dummy named Hugo. So those are our five stories and how they're introduced to the various characters at this cottage here. As far as the cast goes, we have Anthony Baird um, as Hugh Granger. We have Roland Culver as Elliot Foley, Renee Gadd as Mrs. Craig, Sally Ann Hose, I think it's Howes, Sally Ann Howes is Sally O'Hara, the teenager, Mervyn Johns is Walter Craig, Judy Kelly is Joyce Granger, and then of course we've got what's his name, um, Michael Redgrave, who plays what's his toes, Maxwell Freer in the final story, the fifth story. So yeah, that's the setup, the premise, and the cast for Dead of Night from 1945. Now, don't get this confused. There's another movie called Dead of Night, which was a TV movie from 1977, which is also a horror anthology, but a made for TV one. This is the original Dead of Night from 1945. So, and actually, I made this. I actually printed this out, the cover here and stuff. So, because I just when I got the DVD, it just came in an envelope or something. So that's just a little side note there for you. Yeah, I have to say I really love this movie. Now, on the surface, when you read about it, when you hear about it, you kind of get the gist of it and when it's from, you would think, this sounds like it's going to be kind of a boring, old school, black and white kind of movie. For some people, that might be the case. but definitely not for me as somebody that appreciates the classics and has gotten more into black and white films from days gone by as he's gotten older. Um, but I love this for a variety of reasons. So let's just get into them. I really enjoyed the classic atmosphere and narrative that was going on. Really worked for me to get me involved in the movie and the characters. It just kind of has a cozy old school mystery slash horror feel to it, if that makes any sense to you. You know, it's not you're not necessarily on edge the whole time, but it's just got a nice cozy setting, a nice cozy atmosphere. Um, which is really good for telling stories, for telling like ghost stories or horror stories, and that's really what this movie does a good job of. So that's one thing I definitely like. All the individual stories are really solid. There's really no duds in the bunch. I really enjoyed each of them for what they are and how they ultimately tie into the main narrative or wraparound story. Yeah, all five of these stories. Again, I didn't give too much away. I just kind of gave you the first sentence from each story. But like the first story is about a race car driver, Hugh Granger, who basically he survives an accident in a race car driver, and then tries to avoid another accident, and that's as much as I'll say. Sarah O'Hara, remembering the Christmas party, is kind of a ghost story. Um, it's got a good atmosphere to it. Joan Cortland telling a story about buying the mirror for her husband Peter one year for his birthday. That's a really good one. Great performances by the main couple as well as really great music and kind of creepy, just a creepy idea there. The two golfers who fall in love with a woman named Mary Lee, sort of the comedy segment of the five, to sort of break things up a little bit. Like four of the five are taken pretty seriously, or at least they're not trying to be funny necessarily. But the fourth one with these two golfers is definitely more of a horror comedy. I don't even know how much of a horror it is. It's more of just like a fun ghost comedy, I guess, if you want to say. And then the final one, of course, the one that everybody knows about or talks about, is with the ventriloquist, with Maxwell Frere, um, and his dummy named Hugo. That one is as good as advertised. I mean, that one's got probably the most creepy of the five. Great performances, of course, by Michael Redgrave. Um, yeah, so those are kind of the five stories, but I like them all. I can also say there are some genuinely creepy moments with visuals and underlying psychological fears, especially towards the end of the movie when we get sort of a classic dream sequence. It's kind of a mishmash of all the characters and the characters within the dreams or within these stories, I should say, as well as the characters at this cottage. It's just kind of all just anybody that's had a dream can relate to it. You know, you got these you got all these people or all these characters or places, and they all kind of mesh together in a way that doesn't really make sense. But in this movie, it's done really creepy and very effective, and that was definitely something that stood out in this movie. That happens towards the end of the movie. The best part of this movie and what really makes it work for me is definitely the main wraparound story. If you know me, you know with I like a wraparound, a main framing story with my horror anthologies. I'm not as big a fan on just like three or four random stories being told or just being introduced without having any sort of framing device or anything. So my favorite horror anthologies are the ones that have that, and this one does. I mean, for being the first horror anthology in a lot of ways, it does a really good job with that framing story. It's just so engaging and fun the way the main character is introduced to us driving up to this cottage using themes of dreams versus realities and deja vu and the setting of this cottage home. All of it just kind of worked for me, and really like the framing story, and it really makes this whole movie work, in my opinion. Um, I found the music to be really effective as well, a very classic and creepy kind of score that definitely benefits the movie, especially in the mirror segment, the third story. I thought the music was very effective there. Um, the movie's really well paced and very well written overall, effectively executed and balanced between the order and the type of stories that there are. So, you would say that they kind of start with the PG horror and then they sort of work their way up to the scariest. They actually go in the right order in terms of they start out kind of down here. None of them are bad, but they're just kind of more like G horror, PG horror, and then they build up to like the third story. It's a little creepier. The fourth story is a break with comedy, but then that fifth story with the ventriloquist dummies, very effectively creepy. So yeah, just the way they pace this entire movie, and the segments is very effective and very well done. And then finally, you have to talk about the fact that this is a highly influential movie, not just for other horror anthology movies that would come out after it, but there's a certain show that's one of my favorites that this is. I mean, it definitely took from this movie, and that, of course, is the Twilight Zone. This movie is almost like the Twilight Zone before the Twilight Zone. It's about 15 years before the Twilight Zone came out, but these segments feel very Twilight Zone. Even the main framing story feels very Twilight Zoney. Obviously, a lot of the stories in this movie, at least at least three of them, maybe four, are direct Twilight Zone episodes from the original series in the 60s. So if you've seen this movie, you know which ones. I'm not going to give it away here in case you haven't seen this or the Twilight Zone. Although I do question where you've been if that's the case. But yeah, those are my pros. I just really love this movie. It's very effective for me. It doesn't matter that it's from 1945 or that it's in black and white for me. I like a good story. I like good writing, characters, a good framing device, and solid stories all the way through. And I also love the ending of this movie. I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say it's all tied in a nice little package as far as from the start of the movie to the end of the movie. It's like this. It's a big loop, a big circle, and that's very exciting as well. Very effective for me. So yeah, those are my pros. As far as cons goes, these are going to be more for other people, maybe. It is a black and white classic movie that's very much made in the 40s. So I mean, saying that, you're going to have to kind of get used to it in terms of the acting style, which is old school, the delivery of the dialogue by the actors and actresses, and the sort of prim and proper sort of British mystery with a lot of talking and dialogue between characters. I mean, this isn't going to be a movie like you'd see in the last 20 years where they're going to get right to the horror. I mean, you're going to have to get into it, and you're going to have to listen. And you're going to have to be willing to accept the fact it was made in 1945. Acting styles were different, dialogue was more important than just those type of things. So that's more of just a heads up. It's not overly scary, obviously not violent or gory. Um, so that's one thing. That's more of just a warning for those of you that think, oh, this, because if you look at the cover, you might look at this and say, oh, that looks pretty gory, pretty scary. But actually, none of the stuff on the cover is actually part of the movie, I don't think. Well, I shouldn't say that. You got right. These two are right here. Um, but that's pretty much about it, I think. I mean, the skeleton, this bat, they have nothing to do with the movie, but it makes for a nice looking case. So just know that. I will say for myself, I wanted a bit more from the Christmas short. That's the second one with the teenager at the Christmas party. I thought it could have been more flushed out. I thought it could have been a little bit longer. Maybe they could have shortened up the mirror segment, even though I really enjoyed that one. Shorten that up by about 5 minutes and added 5 minutes to the Christmas story, and they would have damn near had a perfect movie. But it just wasn't as flushed out as it could have been. I think it could have had more weight to the overall movie if they had a little bit more there. It's a very the first two are very short, like 5 or 10 minutes each, and then they get longer, 15, 20, probably 15, and then 15, 20 for the last one. So as far as ranking the stories, obviously I got to put the ventriloquist dummy number one. Then I would probably go with the mirror one, number two. I'd probably go with the golfers number three because even though it's not a horror, it's not scary. It's really entertaining and really fun. The characters are really do a good job, and it's just kind of a funny episode that really worked for me to kind of break things up. Then I would probably go with the Christmas party, and then fifth, I'd probably go with the race car driver who has to look out for another kind of accident. But I like them all, so even saying that is my fifth one, I still really enjoy it. So yeah, I just love this horror anthology, guys. If you haven't seen it, check it out. I don't know how easy it is to get on DVD, but I know you can find it on YouTube and other streaming services. It's about I think it's only an hour and a half or so, so it's about the right amount of time for a horror movie and certainly an anthology. But definitely check it out as long as you're not somebody that's bored by black and white or a movie that was made before 1980. I can't speak to everybody on that, but if you're open to it, check it out. I love it. So I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10 for Dead of Night from 1945. Very, very enjoyable and fun horror anthology movie from the mid 40s. So go ahead and comment down below if you guys have seen Dead of Night from 1945, what you think of it. Did you like it? Did you not? Any questions you might have about it? Please like this video and hit the little notification bell down below so you don't miss any of my upcoming reviews for this series. And please be sure to subscribe to my channel as well so you don't miss any of my great horror content. Not only the rest of this series, but what I have coming up, then basically the rest of the year. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope you're enjoying this series. Hope everybody's doing well, but stay scared. Bye.